Hello everyone, Jarek Defiler, the Patient Gamer here to discuss my favorite gaming genre of all time, RPGs. For those not familiar, RPG stands for role-playing game. What this entails is a game where you generally control a character or small party that has some role to play in the game. These characters may be voiced, unvoiced, static, or fluid. It all depends on the game. RPGs are usually heavy with story, characters, and plot that the player takes part in some shape or form. The worlds in most RPGs are generally deep with lore and abundant in NPCs and story, NPCs being non-player characters. Another important facet of RPGs, and perhaps the most fun, is that of character customization. Your character will generally have some sort of stat system that you level up or skills that you unlock as your character increases in experience and strength. So the more you play, the stronger your character gets. Woohoo! This allows most RPGs to have great replayability because each character crafted would be unique and different. Fun stuff! And please note that this list isn't hierarchical. Number 1 isn't better than number 4 or anything like that. In fact, the list is chronological based on release dates, nothing more. So now that the basics are on the table and the foundation is set, allow me to give you, dear gamer, my opinion of 6 fascinating RPGs that completely redefine their subgenre. Number 1. Diablo 2 for that of ARPGs. Diablo 2 is my favorite game of all time, and for good reason. I am the devil. Now, Diablo 2 is considered by many isometric action RPG fans to be the epitome of ARPGs. Released back in June 2000, Diablo 2 was the sequel of prominent ARPG Diablo, or Diablo 1. The reason I'm putting Diablo 2 on this list instead of Diablo 1 is because where Diablo 1 excelled, Diablo 2 took that formula and ran off into the sunset with it. It would influence a plethora of wannabes throughout the years that could not quite take up the mantle, including its own official successors, Diablo 3 and 4. In fact, Path of Exile may be considered the only true Diablo 2 successor by most, which I would agree with. But ultimately, Diablo 2 was so iconic and influential that many developers and fans alike would point to it as the monolith representation of unique itemization, fun fast-paced gameplay, and a dark theme and aesthetic that really immersed the player into this broken, immensely corrupt world of Sanctuary. Back then, developers weren't really afraid of being politically incorrect or not towing the corporate line in order to make games that can reach every player demographic imaginable. Nope, Diablo 2 could give two shits about that stuff. This was a game made by adult gamers for adult gamers, and it shows. Gore, blood, pools filled with naked corpses, dead bodies impaled on spikes and hanging from hooks. That was Diablo 2, and it was great. The player knew exactly what they were getting into, given that in the game they are literally fighting the forces of hell. These aren't nice dudes, they're out to get you. Diablo 2 also brought procedurally generated maps into the mainstream. It was around before, mind you, but not really in major titles, and it was all the more awesome when you could play it with your friends, up to 8 in a party. However, what really set Diablo 2 apart and made it so influential is that of the itemization and leveling system. Each hero you played was capable of having multiple builds with different styles and themes. Dual-wielding Frenzy Barbarian versus a Loot Finder, Lightning Sork versus Fire, Summoner Necro or Poison, and much, much more. The replayability from character builds was paramount in the game's longevity, but that was foreshadowed by the game's itemization system. Diablo 2 has thousands of items with varying usefulness. Granted, most are useless, but given the pool, you could take some fairly basic junk and turn it into some decent stuff. Maybe not in-game worthy, but good for leveling or supporting a specific niche. No other isometric ARPG would succeed in this level of itemization until Path of Exile came around, and this is where Diablo 3 and 4 fail in my opinion. The Blizz devs of this era just do not understand what made Diablo 2's itemization so good, and that is its uniqueness. Stat boosts weren't the main thing you were looking for in Diablo 2 items. It was the affixes that offered fun playstyles and builds. Many of the unique items, which are the equivalent of Diablo 3 and 4's legendaries, would offer skill bonuses, further enhancing your builds, or even grant you the ability to use skills from other classes that weren't your own, via a charge system or just a percentage chance. It was tons of fun. Diablo 2 had its flaws, but overall it was considered to be the gold standard and most influential isometric ARPG that truly redefined the genre. Number 2, we got the Mass Effect Trilogy, my third favorite games of all time. Breakdown. The first game being released in 2007, Mass Effect is technically an action RPG too. However, unlike Diablo 2, it's in the third-person perspective and isn't based heavily around unique itemization or skills. You also have a static voiced player character in that of Commander Shepard, and much less freedom of movement in the game's progression than Diablo 2. Mass Effect, in regard to this list, is of the story and character-driven subgenre of RPGs. Like most BioWare games, you don't play Mass Effect for the combat or the leveling system. Quite the contrary, you play Mass Effect for the story, lore, the characters, your relationships with them, and the fantastic world the game takes place in. Mass Effect is all about these narrative elements you are a part of and how you drive them along. Unlike Diablo 2, you can actually affect the way things turn out in the Mass Effect universe. Based on your decisions, you decide what characters live, which ones die, what factions might gain power while others suffer, and despite the notoriously botched ending on Mass Effect 3 pre-op, the Trilogy does this very well and is what keeps you coming back for more and playing over and over again. BioWare, at least old school BioWare, was exceptional in this regard. Their strength was in their writing, lovable characters, and world building. At the time, Mass Effect was the epitome of this. It really truly defined the way story-driven RPGs were implemented into the mainstream gaming market, especially for a major AAA title, as that genre was generally represented in JRPGs. And still to this day, Mass Effect holds a special place in many a gamer's hearts. Number 3. Skyrim. Now, I know it's not a very popular game, but believe it or not, Skyrim was actually pretty successful back in the day. In all seriousness, we know, we love, and we can't get enough. Skyrim is a gaming beast. Coming out in 2011, Skyrim was a nuke dropped on the gaming industry. Being one of the most successful RPGs of all time, Skyrim has been going strong for over a decade and still to this day has a healthy and extravagant modding community, one of which I take part in heavily. Gotta get my nude orcs from somewhere. Multiple releases over the years would garner even more fame and money for the blockbuster Elder Scrolls behemoth, but what makes me put it on this list is that it really changed the idea of open world RPGs back in the day. Nowadays, open RPGs are a dime a dozen. Turn your head in any gaming convention or browse through Steam and you'll see that the open world RPG subgenre has been done to death. And in fairness, they've been around for a long time, since the 90s. Hell, all the Elder Scrolls games before Skyrim were open world RPGs, Morrowind being the best and my personal favorite. But what Skyrim did was take that genre and really turn it into something special. This I attribute mainly to the advancement of technology at the time. Skyrim was able to offer this really beautiful handcrafted world with unique locations, breathtaking landscapes, and environmental weather systems that, at the time, were pretty damn impressive. I remember in an interview with Todd Howard pre-release where he kept gushing about how when you look off into the distance in Skyrim and you see these giant mountains in the background, that those aren't backdrops or skyboxes, you can actually go there and climb them. And he wasn't wrong. Back in 2011, this was pretty mind-blowing. Graphics were exceptional, albeit buggy, but I don't think anyone would say that Skyrim on release was a bad-looking game. It had really changed the way most would see open-world RPGs, because up until that point, most open-world RPGs were these giant, empty, barren landscapes that would mostly just have no value or interest when traversing. In Skyrim, you're stumbling across little caves, dungeons, random events, and quests all the time. Compared to today's standards, sure, it might not be that impressive, but back then, woo buddy, many a gamergasms were had that year. And still to this day, I personally consider Skyrim to be the most immersive gaming experience out there, more than Mass Effect even, for there is more freedom. It might not have the best writing or quests, and the combat isn't very good, but you can't deny that Skyrim is one of the best games to play for an escape. You can spend hours just wandering the land, climbing mountains, or trudging through snow and flowery fields, taking in the beauty of this magical realm. Throw in a fun follower for good measure, and you got yourself one of the most captivating open-world RPGs that truly redefine the subgenre. And that's without even dipping into mods. Number 4. The Last Sovereign. Just a heads up, The Last Sovereign is an adult game. Notice I didn't say porn game because quite frankly I don't think that does it justice. Yes, it has porn in it, but you don't play The Last Sovereign for the porn. No, you play The Last Sovereign to take part in one of the most complex and intricately written JRPGs that I have ever experienced. Now, JRPG stands for Japanese role-playing game for those who don't know, but it doesn't necessarily have to be a game made in Japan anymore. Nowadays, JRPG represents more of a subgenre of RPGs that have that style of old Japanese titles such as Dragon Quest, Chrono Trigger, or Final Fantasy. The Last Sovereign is very much in that vein, as it was made using RPG Maker. This game is one of the best written and immensely in-depth RPG experiences I have ever had. I'm not really a big fan of JRPGs, but I've played a decent few over the years, and this one is at the top of my list. The Last Sovereign will find you, the player, starting off as an old veteran soldier fighting back the forces of these lustful evil entities, ultimately succumbing to a whole different fate which, in order to avoid spoilers here, finds you ruling over and building entire nations. As the game progresses, you have to make decisions that truly matter in order to forge economies, build diplomacies between factions and nations, and balance the relationship between warring religions, political parties, military factions, cities, and more. Yes, there is a strong sexual element to The Last Sovereign. but it's done so tastefully and written so well to where it actually has a purpose in the game's world. Lust is not just a pervert thing, but a resource that fuels some species in the game. For them, sex is a necessity, that if not obtained regularly, it literally kills them, causing them to shrivel up into these mindless feral creatures and eventually die. Your job as the voice player character is to juggle these perverse factions with those of strict religious or political pursuit, or fearful townsfolk not wanting to be preyed upon by what they think are vile succubi. The political intrigue and diplomatic aspect of this game makes House of Cards look like f***ing Blippi. The writing is so complex that I had decisions I made in the first 10 hours of the game affect me some 130 hours in, and I'm not talking about small consequences, I'm talking major, game-changing, nation-destroying decisions. For instance, I went throughout my first 160 plus hour playthrough not having a specific character in my party because in the first 3 hours of the game I was supposed to go save her, and instead I got distracted and went off doing other things. As a result, she apparently died or something and I never had her in my party. I didn't even know she was an option until I saw her on the wiki later. This would affect me later on as I would come across some fights or decisions that, if I had her in my party, would be much easier to overcome. And it goes without mentioning that I also miss out on all her character lore, backstory, history, and story narrative. There are moments like that throughout the entire game. Every little thing you do, every decision you make, hell, every person you talk to just might have an effect on your playthrough hours down the road. And it's glorious. Truly inspirational storytelling and game design here. And the replayability is insane. So many different pathways you can take and you never can take them all. That is why I consider The Last Sovereign to be a redefining not only adult game, but JRPG. Most porn games just focus on the sexual aspect and doesn't really have any substance, but with The Last Sovereign, it's purposeful. You know what I mean? So if you're interested, it's free on Steam, and if you don't mind adult elements, it's completely worth your time if you dig JRPGs. Don't let the sexual content warning fool you. This is an RPG first and a porn game second. Not even second, like fifth. Number 5. Divinity Original Sin 2. My second favorite game of all time, Divinity Original Sin 2, is, in my humble opinion, the best RPG I have ever played. Not the best CRPG, but the best RPG, period. I would say the best RPG ever made, but I haven't played them all. Divinity has the best writing, voice acting, and combat system of any RPG I've ever played, and that's saying a lot. Divinity Original Sin 2 took the CRPG subgenre and completely modernized it, moved it forward, and set a precedent that quite frankly only Baldur's Gate 3 seems to be able to hold up to. No surprise given that Larian Studios made both games. Divinity managed to take the slower-paced combat systems of older CRPG titles and turn it into a more fast-paced feel with environmental implementations that cohesively synergize with the game's spell and attacks. All this while still maintaining a turn-based system. It's masterful, and Larian Studios deserves all the praise they can get. The characters in Divinity are so compelling and interesting that you genuinely feel for their plight and trials. Depending on how you build your relationships with them, you'll see a friendship or romance grow organically that by the end of the game, you don't want to end because you'll miss them. So you just start a new game, but still. The voice acting and writing is the best I have ever experienced in any game ever. There isn't a single line of dialogue that isn't well written or executed. Everyone seems to be giving their 110% and I applaud them for it. Just fantastic work all around. Like most CRPGs, decisions also matter in Divinity Original Sin 2. You can kill off major characters, forge alliances with demons, join what used to be rival factions, or quite literally just kill everyone if you want. The replayability is also insane, there's no limit. I've done probably over a dozen full playthroughs, and every time I find something new that I haven't seen before. Divinity Original Sin 2 allows you to do basically whatever the hell you want, from character creation to slaughtering a town of innocents, and it's done so well that this is a game that I would probably consider flawless. Not many I can say about that. I would really have to dig deep into finding something oppressively negative about Divinity that isn't subjective. So with all these factors combined, I think Divinity Original Sin 2 truly redefined the CRPG subgenre. Number 6. Kenshi. The final nail in the trophy case of amazing RPGs, Kenshi represents Sandbox RPGs. Almost made entirely by one dude, Kenshi is an absolute phenomenon and diamond in the rough when it comes to Sandbox RPGs. You are able to become virtually anything in this bleak post-apocalyptic world. You want to be a caravan trader? Go for it. How about a bounty hunter? Nothing stopping you. Thief assassin that sneaks into places at night whacking fools and stealing goods? Very profitable trade. Cannibal that skins people alive and or turns them into slaves? We got that too. But unlike most games that allow freedom to pursue a given craft or lifestyle, Kenshi does it in a most unique way, by having you fail. You want to become an expert martial artist? Well, you gotta go and fight then. and get your ass kicked a lot, because that's the only way to level up your toughness and martial arts skills. You want to beef up your athletics? Well, get running, man. Gotta train them legs. Strength? Put a bunch of rocks in your backpack and go trekking across the desert. Dodge? Fight enemies better than you with no clothes on. Everything you do in this game improves you. Outside of outright dying, there is no losing in Kenshi, despite its difficulty. You can get your arms and legs hacked off and you just have them replaced with stronger mechanical versions. You get knocked out and imprisoned? Great! Good time to train your lockpicking and athletic stats when you finally bust out and have to run from the guards. You even have cooking, farming, and labor stats that allow you to create your own restaurant chain if you want. Or you can be a blacksmith and engineer, forging weapons and armor to sell at your store. The sky's the limit. And there's factions upon factions that you can create relationships with. Hiring some to be your bodyguard or to defend your base, come to your store to trade, or just help bust them out of prison if need be. You can run as a solo character or build a literal army of 32 people. Or with mods you can get that up to 256. You can build your own city and fill it with your own faction members, or you can just buy a house somewhere and make that home. It's amazing! If this game were a woman, I'd leave my wife and marry it. I have never seen such innovation in a video game before. Kenshi is truly a labor of love, and every particle and pixel in the game proves it. And glory, glory, hallelujah, they're making a second one. Woo! So given its intricate stat system, unique world, and expansive crafting and building mechanics, Kenshi is by far the most redefining sandbox RPG on the market in my opinion. Definitely worth a look if you haven't played it. So there you go, ladies and gents, my opinion on a few of the most redefining RPGs of their subgenres. What do you think? You agree, disagree? Let me know in the comments. And be sure to like, share, and subscribe if you'd be so kind. This has been Jarek Defiler, basking in the glory of RPGs. You all have a good morning, afternoon, evening, or night depending on where you are. Game on.